Seeing is Believing, Part 1. Ever since I was young, I was always so fascinated by the night sky. So many twinkling stars hanging there in the infinite depths of space as far as the eye can see, almost like a big ocean of sparkling diamonds, so deep that it's unfathomable. There are so many mysteries about the universe around us, and I wanted to know what those mysteries were more than anything. My curiosity was always insatiable, and I spent every moment possible looking up at the stars at night, sometimes not even sleeping until the sun came up in the morning. I remember my parents taking me on trips out into the middle of nowhere, far away from the cities and their light pollution, so we could camp and look at the stars with the telescope they had bought me for my 5th birthday.
Look at its star.
It really is breathtaking to see the night sky so far away from any light pollution. The belt of the Milky Way, our home, can clearly be seen stretching across the night sky, glowing with that brilliant white haze tinted with shades of red and blue. When looking at the dark spaces between the stars with your naked eye, it seems so empty. But I figured out that focusing my telescope just right when pointed at those dark spaces would reveal even more stars whose light simply couldn't be seen by the eyes alone. There are more stars above us than it's even possible to count, and many of those stars probably have their own planets orbiting them. Thinking about all of those stars and all of those planets made me think and wonder what it would look like on the surface of those planets. I wondered what it would be like if I stood on those planets and looked up at the night sky, imagining what new constellations would reveal themselves to me. I wondered if any other planets had life, just like our home planet does here in our solar system. There were, and still are, so many questions, and my mind never stopped thinking about them. I wanted answers to those questions, those cosmic mysteries. I needed answers. In school and in my free time, I pored over every textbook I could get my hands on that had to do with astronomy and telescopic engineering. As a kid, I always had a knack for understanding technology, and I found ways to jailbreak my iPhones, code my own programs and games, and even program simple robotics. So it isn't surprising that in high school, I came up with the idea of creating a hybrid telescope. At first, it was a cool concept that I fantasized about, but eventually, I began to spend all of my time building my own telescopes and testing out my own ways of customizing them to see if I could make them even better. Once I entered university and gained access to some observatories with high-powered telescopes, and learned much more advanced mathematics, electrical engineering, and software engineering, my passion had finally paid off. My idea for the televisioscope was born. I'm sure you're wondering, what the hell is a televisioscope? Well, first off, let me tell you that I'm a genius with technology, not with choosing names, so cut me some slack on that, okay? The idea came from combining telescope technology with visual technology such as television, phone, and computer screens. Essentially, my televisioscope takes in light through a curved lens that focuses that light onto an extremely powerful optical sensor. That optical sensor, which is capable of registering individual photons of light, then translates those into electrical signals that are passed on to a powerful laser. That powerful laser is capable of emitting those same individually registered photons of light, except those photons are now charged with 1,000,000 times more power, and they are sent through yet another curved lens to yet another optical sensor, which registers each amplified photon. In layman's terms, it basically takes a super tiny amount of light, say from an extremely distant star, focuses it, makes it 1,000,000 times brighter, and then focuses it again before digitally capturing the image so it can be viewed on a screen and recorded. It took months and months of trial and error, but I still remember the night that my televisioscope became fully functional and worked as I expected for the first time.
Woo!
It was a monumental day, or rather night, for me, and honestly, for humanity as well. The moment I looked through the viewfinder as my televisioscope was pointed at the 82G Eridani star system, which is approximately 19.7 light years away, with at least 3 known exoplanets orbiting it. I saw the third exoplanet as clearly if I were looking at the moon with binoculars, and it made me cry. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I cried like a baby right then and there. It was the greatest accomplishment of my life, and even more, it was the greatest advancement of astronomical technology in the history of mankind. I can't even begin to tell you how magnificent and elated I felt in that moment. And it wasn't because I knew I made history or that I'd be famous. It was because my dreams were coming true. And now I had a way to start revealing those cosmic mysteries I had always been obsessed with growing up. I couldn't wait to spend my time studying the night sky. Immediately, that night I began taking notes about all 3 exoplanets in the 82G Eridani star system, and I didn't sleep at all that night or the following day. There was way too much to learn and not enough time. After a while, however, it dawned on me that as good as my televisioscope was, I was barely tapping into its potential. I started digging through all of my old notes and blueprints, and after a few weeks of tweaking different settings, I reached another aha moment. With everything finely tuned, I once again looked through my televisioscope, and at first I thought it wasn't working. But after messing with the level of zoom and adjusting the focus, I realized that it was working. I just didn't understand what I was looking at. Then, a stunning realization slowly washed over me. I thought, no way. Am I really looking at... Are those... grains of sand? I was really looking at the individual grains of sand on an undiscovered planet somewhere in the opposite arm of the Milky Way. I couldn't believe it, but there it was, right in front of me, and I could see it with my own 2 eyes. The grains of sand were a rusty, reddish-orange color and seemed to be like a fine powder. Interesting. I wonder if I can get a good look at the surrounding environment and make sense of what this sandy powder is, I said aloud, to nobody in particular, since I was alone in the observatory. Then I played with the controls on the televisioscope until I was able to zoom out enough to see that the fine powder was actually part of a vast desert of reddish-orange colored sand dunes. As far as I could tell, it seemed like the whole exoplanet was covered in it, with the exception of a few dark red jagged rocks sticking out from some of the dunes. Immediately, I began dictating my notes to my audio recorder so I could easily document everything I was seeing without needing to look away from the viewfinder. That night, I must have spent at least 6 hours at the telescope without getting up to drink water, use the restroom, or do anything but examine this new planet. From that moment on, I knew that I had just launched humanity into a new age of scientific discovery. Astronomy and the stars are my area of expertise, but I knew that with my technology, the physicists would probably be drooling and climbing over each other to get their hands on this technology. It could potentially also finally reveal the inner workings of the mysterious quantum realm that science hasn't had much luck in deciphering. First things first, though, I had my own cosmic mysteries that needed to be revealed, so I decided to keep my new discovery to myself. It's not a big deal. I already showed everyone my televisioscope and received contracts with major companies that wanted to purchase the technology. It'll keep them busy and satisfied for a while as I perfect my newly updated televisioscope. About a week later, I had been working in the observatory all through the night and all through the following day, and it was now nighttime. I could feel my eyelids getting so heavy as I worked on some of the specs at my desk. So I decided I would rest my eyes just for a moment, and I laid my head down on the desk. Before I knew it, I was fast asleep. "Hey, Mitch, wake up, dude," my colleague Alan said, nudging my shoulder. "Huh? What? Oh, what's up, Alan?" I said, wiping some drool from the side of my mouth, cheeks turning slightly red from embarrassment. You've got a..." Alan pointed at my right cheek. I looked down with my eyes and noticed that a sticky note was hanging onto my cheek. Quickly snatching the note from my cheek and throwing it onto the table, I looked up at Alan with a straight face and said, "What note? I have no idea what you're talking about. You saw nothing." Then we both cracked up and started laughing. "Yeah, sure, dude. Nothing to see here," Alan retorted, still chuckling. "Anyway, I need to ask you something, Mitch. Have you been messing with the settings on the televisioscope?" Suddenly the laughter was gone, and I felt my stomach flip, as if I were at the top of a roller coaster and just started going down the steep decline. Why do you ask?" It was all I could think to say at first, but I knew at that moment I had just given myself away. Understanding filled Alan's eyes, and a grin spread across his face as he said, "You did! I knew it, you sneaky snake!" Then he motioned for me to follow him over to the televisioscope, so I got up and walked over to it with him. "While you were making sure your desk didn't get up and walk away during the night, oops, I mean sleeping, I decided to let you catch up on some rest and figured I would get some more time in with the televisioscope. That's when I saw your discovery, man. You left it pointed right at whatever planet you found. When were you gonna tell me, dude?" Alan's surfer lingo of always saying dude and man and righteous made him seem deceptively simple, or at least not an astronomer with a PhD, but he'd been my partner throughout my whole time at university, and admittedly, I really did want to tell him when I made the discovery. It's funny how even an isolated nerd such as myself is just as much of a social creature as anybody else, because it was so difficult not to want to shout my discovery from the rooftops and tell everyone, "Everyone, come check it out! I just made the biggest discovery humanity has ever seen!" Despite my original thought of not telling anyone about the advancements I made on my televisioscope, I figured there was no point in hiding it from Alan since he's already seen it anyway. "Relax, man," I said mockingly, emphasizing the word man, but in a playful way. "You saw me wrestling with the desk. I was busy making sure it didn't run away. I was gonna tell you as soon as you came in." He looked at me and chuckled, responding with, "Yeah, well, you better work on your wrestling moves then, dude, because you were knocked the heck out." Then he leaned over to look through the viewfinder and said, "Come check this out, my dude. I was taking a look around this star system you found on the other side of the Milky Way and found a few more exoplanets. I swear, it looks like one of them has oceans of water and dry land." Whoa. That's when I knew I had to come wake you up. That shook off any remaining sleepiness I had been feeling, and I ran over next to him. "No way, are you serious?" Leaning back and stepping out of the way, Alan motioned with his arm for me to come have a look for myself. So I sat down in the chair and looked through the viewfinder. I couldn't believe it. He was right. There were oceans of liquid water all over the exoplanet, and the dry land seemed to be composed of a variety of elements, with mountains in places and cliffs in others. A moment later, I felt Alan nudge me and say, "Geez, don't forget to breathe, dude. And I'd close your mouth, too, unless you're trying to catch some flies for dinner or something." I heard him chuckle softly as I took in a deep breath and picked my jaw up off the floor. "Hey, I don't blame you, dude. I did the same thing when I saw it. Super cool, right?" I leaned back in the chair, pulling away from the viewfinder, but found that I was still speechless for a moment. Finally, I swiveled in the chair, turning to face Alan. "You know, I think we should keep this to ourselves for now, Alan. I know, but hear me out first, okay? I already signed the deal with Celestron and NASA, and they've got the televisioscope to play with, so they'll already have their hands full for a while. Besides, I just barely figured these new settings out, and there's a lot more research and testing that needs to be done before announcing it. So, what do you say if just you and I use this updated version to start cataloging the far end of the Milky Way and testing it?" Alan put a hand to his chin and started scratching the scruffy patch of hair there. It took him a few moments, but finally he said, "Sure, okay, that makes sense. It'd be an honor to be one of the first people in history to start documenting these discoveries. But dude, I better be getting credit for everything I document. Deal?" I looked at him and playfully said, "Seriously?" Then I told him, "Of course. You know I wouldn't take credit for anything you discovered. Let's do this." Alan smiled and responded with his signature, "Righteous," as we high-fived, then shook hands. 2 months later, Alan and I had spent the better part of the last 2 months observing and cataloging everything we found on the opposite side of the Milky Way. I think the only times we didn't spend all night taking turns looking at the stars was when we had both been up for several days and couldn't help but to go home and pass out for a while, and that only happened a handful of times. We had documented nearly 1,200 exoplanets, including making notes about their elemental composition, size, orbit, rotation, and distance from Earth. It was incredible to be making so many amazing discoveries about our own galaxy, but something kept nagging at me. Now that we finally have such an awe-inspiring ability to see worlds close up in high definition that are almost unfathomably distant from Earth, I had been harboring a hope that we might discover some form of life on one of these exoplanets. Ever since I was young, I always fantasized about whether or not life existed elsewhere in the universe and wondered what it would be like, and if there were any other sapient and intelligent species like humans. There was just one problem. I realized that what had been nagging at me was the fact that on every single exoplanet we found and observed, there were absolutely no signs of life whatsoever. Not even hints of fossils, plant life, or microbes, much less animate or intelligent life. It didn't feel right though. I mean, the probabilities alone seemed to indicate that life should exist all over the universe. But the more discoveries we made, the more barren and empty the universe began to feel. Finally, one night, Alan and I had been working in the observatory, and while he was sitting at his desk entering some of our discoveries into the computer, I decided to try something we hadn't thought to do yet. I maneuvered the televisioscope so it was pointed at our nearest galactic neighbor, the Andromeda galaxy, and started to zero in on a star system that I thought looked promising. Truth be told, I had no idea if I'd even be able to see anything that far away. But so far, my televisioscope had far exceeded my expectations. So I thought it was at least worth trying. I started increasing the zoom until the outer edge of Andromeda that is closest to us began coming into focus. The more it grew and came into focus, the more I could tell that I had actually aimed directly at a star system. Ha! Bingo! Nailed it, and I found a star system on my first try, I thought to myself as I smirked, feeling confident. As the star system began to fill the screen of the viewfinder, I could see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 exoplanets interspersed around a smaller yellow star. In fact, It immediately struck me as looking quite similar to the sun, but I had no way to truly tell, given that we're so close to the sun here on Earth, and I have no idea how exactly our sun would look from so far away. Still, I couldn't help but continue looking at it, getting the feeling that it really did look a lot like our sun. What a cool discovery! Wait, how many exoplanets are there again? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8! Huh, crazy! The star system I just happened to look at in the outer edge of Andromeda has a star that looks just like our sun, and it even has 8 orbiting exoplanets, just like our solar system. Huh, what are the chances? I thought to myself, becoming exponentially intrigued by what I had just discovered. It was so exhilarating, and yet also gave me such a strange feeling that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I decided to take a closer look at the exoplanets and see just how well my televisioscope could handle when observing something so far away. Zooming in closer and focusing on the largest exoplanet first, it became more and more apparent that I was looking at some kind of gas giant. Then, things started to become quite strange, because as the gas giant filled the screen of the viewport, I could see different stripes and spots of white, red, orange, brown, and yellow, the same color patterns as Jupiter and our own solar system. That, in and of itself, isn't all that strange, but what was really strange was the fact that this gas giant also had a large red spot just below the equator, exactly like Jupiter. No way. How could this be? I mean, it's not exactly impossible or anything. I suppose the universe is vast enough that the probability of another planet just like Jupiter is pretty realistic, but so close to us? And it happens to be the first spot I looked at in Andromeda? I pondered, keeping my eyes on the screen of the viewfinder and my fingers glued to the controls. What is going on? This feels so strange. Something tells me that I'm going to find even more similarities here in this star system. I don't know why, but I can just feel it somehow. I clicked some of the buttons on the televisioscope and maneuvered it to one of the much smaller exoplanets closer to the star, which seemed to be glowing a pale blue color. That glowing pale blue color suddenly began to make my mouth feel dry and my stomach began flipping. I gulped and began pressing the controls to zoom in closer. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. Is it? As it came into focus, I could see that the exoplanet had a random assortment of white clouds spread out through its atmosphere. Below the clouds, I could see that most of its surface was the undeniable blue of liquid water, and poking up through the water seemed to be several massive chunks of land, much like continents. At this point, I began to feel dizzy. I realized I had subconsciously been holding my breath again, so I tried to take in a deep breath, but it came out as an audible gasp instead. The dry land, the continents I was looking at, they weren't just barren and empty chunks of land. Near the equator, I could see huge patches of dark green color. Life! There's life! I said, unable to contain myself anymore. Hold on, dude. Did you just say something about life, or are my ears playing tricks on me? Alan asked as he swiveled around in his chair to face me. When I still hadn't responded to his question a moment later, and clearly still had my mouth hanging open as I stared through the viewfinder, he didn't waste any time and ran over to me. Come on, man, what's going on over here? What'd you find? You can't leave me hanging like that, Alan excitedly asked me. It was difficult, but I managed to pull myself away from the viewfinder and I turned to look at Alan. Alan, I need you to look at this and tell me I'm not crazy, please. This is insane. I almost can't believe it. Yes, I said there's life. I decided to play with the televisioscope and see if it was possible to observe anything in Andromeda, and lo and behold, The first star system I focused on happened to have an exoplanet with liquid water, meteorological systems of clouds, and dry land with the very obvious shades of green plant life near the equator. For a moment, I thought maybe Alan didn't believe me as he stared incredulously at me. You're joking, right? Are you serious? Let me see! I stood up and moved over to the left so Alan could take a seat and peer into the viewfinder to see for himself. Looking at him staring wide-eyed and mouth hanging open brought a smile to my face and made me chuckle. Now who's the one trying to catch some flies for dinner? I playfully chastised. But seriously, don't forget to breathe, Alan. This time he chuckled at my comment, then closed his mouth, leaned back, and looked at me. We both stared at each other for a long moment, not knowing what to say. It was truly a speechless moment. Life exists in Andromeda.